mythology and mathematics are often thought of as opposites they're thought of at opposite ends of a spectrum. And when we think of mathematics, we tend to not think of mythology. That's because mathematics is the stuff of logic and there's no room for error, while mythology is the stuff of legend and heroes and myth. While this may be true in some cases, both areas of knowledge undoubtedly play an important role in helping a writer craft a narrative. To shed more light on this, we welcome Miss Priya Narayanan, a poet and children's author, to discuss how differently math and mythology serve as inspiration for a writer to craft a narrative and how a reader might carry both of these alongside within themselves. A big round of applause for Miss Priya.
Hi, everybody. So today, I've been asked to talk about math and mythology. So when Neve, the people at Neve asked me to talk about this topic, I was a little, surprised, and I was like, what is it that connects math and mythology? So the first thing I did, like everyone else does, is go and Google, okay? So I Googled, and for the first 5 or 6 pages, till my patience kind of wore off, I couldn't find anything substantial which was saying, yeah, this is the connection between math and mythology. So then I sat back and said, yeah, why have these people asked me to talk about this? What is that common denominator between these two? And then I realized that, hey, maybe it's me. Because very unconsciously, I ended up writing 3 books which have this underlying connection between math and mythology. So before we go into actually talking about math and mythology, I thought I'll just talk about these 3 books a little bit. So the very first book I wrote in 2018, it's called 10 Heads for Tanuj, and I'm sure nobody needs any connection with mythology there. Ravana, 10 heads, it's a no-brainer. So in this book, it's a very silly, funny book for really young readers, and Tanuj is the fan, he's the biggest fan of Ravana, okay? And so Ravana is very happy, and he endows him with this blessing and, extra 9 heads. Suddenly he grows up, gets up one morning and finds himself with 10 heads. Ravana thinks it's a very nice thing to have done, but unfortunately for Tanuj, he lives in this day and age. So just imagine brushing 10 sets of teeth, combing 10 heads of hair, getting inside the school bus, going to school. So it was not something he really liked, and he wanted to get rid of them. Ravana, of course, is upset, but he said, okay, fine, I'll keep a condition. And the reason for the condition and all, you have to read in the book. I'm not going into that, but he keeps a condition because I'm kind of just giving you the relationship with math here, okay? So he says that if you want to get rid of the extra heads, you have to fail in your favorite subject, okay? And guess what is Tanuj's favorite subject? Exactly, right? So this boy is really worried. He's like, yeah, this is my favorite subject. I'm so good at it. How do I fail in an exam? Even if I try really hard, I'm not going to be able to fail. But then how does he do that? That's again something that you can read in the book. I'm not going to go into that. So that was my first book. Very unwittingly I bought, and of course Ravana is my favorite character from mythology. So I've written a lot of trivia about, all the good things, Ravana stands for. So you can read that. Srinivasa Ramanujam, of course, it is an out-and-out math book, right? It's about the mathematician. You try, and of course, it's again written for a very young reader group. So I have kind of introduced, some of the concepts of, that Ramanujam dealt with in a very, child-friendly manner. So where is mythology there? So mythology, you'll not find it in this book. But in my 3 years of research on the life of Ramanujam, I also went to all the places that he had been to. So I went to Kumbakonam, and on the street that his house is, it is, you have the iconic Sarangapani temple. And so every day he gets up in the morning as a child, he listens to the chants coming from the temple, he looks at the beautiful gopurams with, the gods and goddesses sculpted into them. And his mother is a great devotee of goddess Namagiri. Okay, so of course Ramanujam also became a great devotee of Namagiri. In fact, he said that the ideas, mathematical ideas that I pour into the papers are not my own. It's Namagiri sitting on my tongue and dictating, and I'm just a medium, right? And he also famously, of course, said that an equation has no meaning if it is not kind of expressing the thought of God, right? So he was extremely religious, and when he was young, his mom kind of told him a lot of stories. Like our parents and grandparents have told us stories from mythology. His parents, his mom also told him a lot of stories. So that is the connection here. And then, of course, you have demons and demonesses of Hindu mythology. And you'll all be raising your eyebrows and wondering, where does math come here? But I'm not going to go into that now. That will come later. Okay. So at this point, I want to ask all of you, what do you think is math? And why do we need math? Anyone? Ashwin, of course, you're a mathematician. You're not allowed to answer. Anybody wants to kind of say, what is math? What do you understand by math? Yeah.
So math is basically like math is basically like numbers, and it's like 90% like and it's 90% like it's like common sense, not exactly common sense, but then it's like logic.
Yes.
Logic kind of because there's logic in everything, and specifically math, and it's just logic and numbers.
Absolutely. Okay. Anybody else says? Yes, of course. Wait, I'll give them.
Math is the language of gods.
Oh, wow. That's lovely. We'll come to that. Yes, he also wants to say something.
Math is numbers.
Okay, great. Okay, now let's go to mythology. What do you know about, what do you understand by mythology? Anybody? Any of the adults here? What is mythology? What have you taken away? I'm sure all of you have heard stories from mythology growing up. Oh, yes.
So mythology is like what people believe in. It doesn't have to be true, but like the stories.
Absolutely, okay. What else? Anybody else? Yes?
Like stories from which we draw conclusions, values, and use them today.
Okay, but that can be any kind of stories. No, what's different? What's the USP of mythology?
It is fictitious.
Okay, not everyone will agree with you there, but yeah, okay, fine. Okay. So, and can you find a common ground between? So, the common denominator, I just joked, okay, I am not the common denominator between math and mythology. There is something much more important, much more, greater than all that. So, can you find a connection between both of them? Someone told numbers, somebody said, yeah, fiction, right? Okay. Can anybody kind of think about anything that might bring them together? Imagination, okay. Absolutely.
I would say, like math, you're given a certain set of numbers,
Right.
and then you calculate on that and come to a result.
Right.
And so mythology is you have a set of stories,
Okay.
which might or might not be true, and then we analyze them and think them
And
through
come
to some.
Oh, lovely. That's a very nice interpretation. Good. Great. Anybody else? Yeah.
Something that is larger than life.
Okay.
Uh,
Math is larger than life, you think so?
Yes.
Okay.
So
I'm
it's
glad you brought that out. Yes.
boundless. Maybe if I'm not using too technical terms, but what I feel is कि it's about the time and space. एक यहाँ से वहाँ जा रहा है, यहाँ से
Right.
वहाँ आ रहा है.
Okay.
I cannot imagine that doing in reality.
Absolutely.
Probably it gives me the energy to think something beyond life, making
Right.
my life a bit
Right.
larger than
Right.
what it could be.
Great. Yeah, you wanted to say something.
I think what maths helps us do is build relationship between things around us and
Okay.
get meaning out of them.
Okay.
And mythology does the same thing.
Absolutely.
How things relate to each other and therefore what's the meaning of them.
Great. Lovely. Okay. So I'm going to, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, just leave it here. Okay. So this is my interpretation of.
Excuse me,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So,
both governed by a set of principles.
oh, okay. That's a very technical answer, but yes, it's true. So for me, this, my interpretation of the connection between math and mythology is this. Somebody said imagination, and this is what it is, right? When you have a blank slate, somebody talked about numbers. This little child here talked about numbers. If you kind of boil down the entire thing about maths, you boil it down to the idea of numbers. But can you see numbers around you? No, right? It's only when you write it down you can actually see numbers. You cannot otherwise see 1 or 100 or billion or anything like that, right? You cannot see it. And similarly, and of course you cannot touch or feel it. Similarly, when you boil mythology down to its, essence, it's all about God, good and bad, okay? And you cannot see all of them either, right? You cannot touch God, you cannot feel God, at least feel physically, right? You can feel it emotionally maybe, but you cannot actually touch and feel God or the goodness or badness in people. So that is what I think, for me, connects math and mythology, the aspect of abstractness. Okay, it all leaves to your imagination, and hence a mathematician can actually let his or her imagination go wild. And then I remember when we were in 11th or 12th, we were introduced to the idea of imaginary numbers, right? Like, at that time you wonder, why do you need to imagine numbers, right? But it's that whole idea of where can you take your imagination, how extreme, to what extreme limit can you take your imagination to? And that's what happens with mythology also, It's taking your imagination off a lot of things to the extreme. Go to the next one. So here, I was also asked to talk a little bit about how we can, engage with mathematics and mythology. So as a writer, where do I find, or where do generally writers find inspiration in mathematics to write about? So the first thing is mathematical concepts, okay? So like we talk about numbers, we talk about small concepts like addition, subtraction, the operations that happen. We talk about concepts like infinity, right? We have theorem like Pythagoras theorem and stuff like that. So a lot of interesting books have been written. These are just a very, handful of these books, but these are books which bring, math in a very fun way into the life of a child, right? Lovely illustrations, and the concepts are broken down in such a child-friendly manner that you feel like, even I, at this age, love to read these kind of books, right? Picture books are evergreen. There is no age limit for them. There are a lot of books by, I think, Pratham also, which, Tulika also, I think, which deal with mathematical concept. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the photographs here. But this is one way in which you can, get maths into, for adults. I fell in love with math actually after I left school, right? I'm an architect by profession, or an interior designer, but for me in school, I did like math, but the way it was taught was not the best, and I didn't really love math at that time. But after I've left school, I've read up so many books on maths, right? There's a book called Numbers, which is wonderful. There's a book called Euclid's Geometry, Euclid's Window, sorry, which is really nice. And then, of course, I was telling Ashwin yesterday, Fermat's Last Theorem, right, by Simone Singh. So these are books which really introduce, mathematical concepts to you in such a fun way that it's literally unputdownable. You don't feel like, it's a textbookish kind of a thing and it's droning, droning, droning. You really want to read those books. So that was one way to engage with mathematical concepts. The next one. The next one is, of course, to talk about mathematicians and their lives. So biographies, like I engaged with Ramanujam and his life. I spent 3.5 years researching him. So you get to know a lot about, what is it that drives mathematicians, to do what they're doing? What is how did they get passionate about their subject, and how did they engage with their subject? So these are some of the iconic books. On a Beam of Light, I would recommend all of you to grab the book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book on the life of Albert Einstein. Of course, all the other books also I have read, and I would recommend them. When I'm talking about, mathematicians and their lives, I think what is also important is the socio-political scenario in which they actually, grew and developed their skills, right? So when it comes to Ramanujam, he kind of was developing as a mathematician when India was under the British Raj. The freedom struggle had just, started off taking, gathering steam. And when he went to Cambridge, the World War I started, right? So these were the political situations which was very, otherwise to the common man in India or in the world, it was really, really kind of overwhelming. But for Ramanujam, when you read about, especially when you read The Man Who Knew Infinity by Robert Canigal, you will kind of get to know that, he was not really bothered about what was happening around him. He was not really bothered about how World War again. Of course, it affected him because, vegetables were in shortage and he was a strict vegetarian. And so in Cambridge, he was literally starving all of the days. We just talked about, I think Janaki Sabej just talked about Pati's rasam. And rasam was one thing he knew to make, So almost every day he used to make rasam and eat, in a small room there. So these were the things were physically affecting him, but mentally, as a mathematician, he was actually growing, right? He really explored himself, he pushed himself. That was the time when he actually developed the, partition theory with Hardy. So that, and of course, another thing I found in my research was that there was a window in 1914, a one-week window, when both Mahatma Gandhi and Ramanujan were in London, right? But I doubt they even knew who the other person was, or whether, they engaged. They never engaged with each other. Because Gandhiji he had come from South Africa and he was going to India, and Ramanujan happened to be there for some, reason. So these are the socio-political situations also, I think, as adults, or as, at least for me, I find it very fascinating to see how these kind of shape, mathematicians. It's not only mathematicians, any kind of, field if you look at. The next one. Okay, coming to mythology. So I would just say that mythology is like an Akshay Patra, okay? It's a continuous giver of stories, okay? It's a never-ending giver of stories. You can mine stories from like even Mahabharata, if you see, more Mahabharata than Ramayana, it has so many strands with so many, subplots and sub-stories, characters you might not have heard for the first time, but when you dig deep, you have so many characters with such different, takes on their lives and how to conduct lives. So mythology is something which which is why I think mythological fiction, mythological fiction is so popular today. Everyone wants to kind of, the whole thing that it allows interpretation. You can make your own, interpretation of what the story is and, present it to the audience. The most important, of course, is suspension of disbelief, like I talked about. Okay, I don't think I talked about here. So suspension of disbelief is basically where you keep your thinking mind away and just allow the entire magnificence to take, charge of your thinking. So which is where I'm kind of now connecting math and mythology in terms of measurements, okay, measuring the universe. So being an architect and designer myself, we know that even from the Vedic ages, human being has always wanted to understand his or her place in the whole universe. How do we measure up to our surroundings? And human being has always been used as a measurement, as a tool to measure the universe. So in the Vedic era, 1 Nara, or 5 feet 3 inches, was the average height of the human at that time. So it was called 1 Nara, okay? And 8,000 Naras put together made 1 Yojana. And 1 Yojana actually translates into 13 kilometers, okay? So 1 Nara is 5 feet 3 inches. 8,000 Nara is 13 kilometers, and that is 1 Yojana. So in the story of Hiranyaksha, which is there in Demons and Demonesses of Hindu mythology, so I'm connecting them. Varaha Avatara, Vishnu is born in the form of Varaha. He is born from the nostril of Brahma. He's a tiny boar, and within a matter of seconds, he grows into 6,000 Yojana tall. So can anybody calculate how many kilometers that is? 6,000 into 13? 78,000. Okay, so in a matter of seconds, Varaha grows from a tiny boar to 78,000 kilometers, right? Which is why I call suspension of disbelief. You cannot keep your logical mind there. It's a huge universe out there, When math and mythology come together, they take you into a fascinating world where measurements don't, kind of matter. You just have to understand the, overwhelming proportions that they're talking about. Similarly, Mount Meru was 84,000 Yojana. Anyone wants to take a guess? You'll all have to have calculators. So it comes to more than 10 lakh kilometers, okay? And the distance between the Earth and the Moon is 3,84,000 kilometers. So how much tall would Mount Meru be is for you all to imagine, right? Again, suspension of disbelief. So this is what I think is fantastic about the whole idea of math and mythology, the abstractness of, that connects both of them, and the idea that using math, how the people who actually conceived mythology have kind of created such a larger than life universe that we can immerse ourselves in and have fun. I'll just, because I talked about, Ramanujam, I'd just like to conclude by saying that mathematicians, since ages, have always wanted to measure the length of the equator. They've been obsessed with it, okay? Any mathematician you see, their biography, they would have tried to measure the length of the equator. Ramanujam also wanted to do that. So in 1914, he didn't have calculators, he didn't have computers, nothing. He measured, using his own calculations, he came up with the figure of 40,078 kilometers as the length of the equator. Now, why is it difficult to measure the length of the equator? Because Earth is not a perfect sphere. It's an ellipsoid, okay? So it makes it all the more complex. So he came up with the figure of 40,078 kilometers. And today, with all the computers, satellite, imagery and everything at our disposal, the number is actually, they have calculated as 40,075 kilometers. So it was just 3 kilometers off, right? So I think that is the beauty of Ramanujam. That's the beauty of mythology that I talked about. Thank you so much.